shine like this in a matter of time I spent on some locked up in the back of the paddy wagon, cuffs locked on wrist. See my dreams unfold, nightmares come true. It was time to marry the game, and I said, yeah, I do. If you want it, you gotta see it with a clear eye view. Got shorty, she trying to bless me like I said I do. Like a sneeze, please for them tricks to squeeze, I'm getting green. Never let them get in between of what we started. Lord, but I'm hard-hearted, they love me when I was stuck in their head. When I departed, I go and get it regardless. Draw it like I'm an artist, I'm crawling, went straight to walking with foreigns in my garages are foreign. Menage, sucking and swallowing anything for $1. They tell me, get him, I got him. I did it without an album. I did it for Mariah. Love, I'm on fire. Icy as a hot and Philly flyer. When I bought the Rolls Royce, they thought it was lease. Then I bought that new Ferrari. Hey, the rest in peace. Hey, the rest in peace. We'll dive into the GFS here in a second after I go over this. We'll let a couple more people filter in first. All right, we got enough now. Get going now. So I put out this threat map earlier this evening before my power went out. Thankfully, I think this is kind of represents my thoughts pretty good right now. I'm pretty confident that northwest of 95. This is going to be a pretty blockbuster snowstorm. There's really no other way to cut it. I think, in my opinion, this is the biggest snowstorm of the year for a lot of people. And you know what? Some people might bust. But I think there's a lot of people that are going to walk away pretty happy with this storm. Now, that being said, right, this is a really complicated setup. It's a really complicated setup. So I'm not fully bought into any one specific scenario right now, but I am pretty confident. I am pretty confident in a scenario, but I'm not fully bought in on anything still right now, just because I still do have some concerns. With a lot of this inverted trough, double barrel mess, I still have some concerns. Because I should. When we're this far out. We're only this far out, and we're still having, a lot of model noise. It's hard not to ignore. But what we have been seeing over the past day or so in terms of changes, models have kind of gone back and forth, to be honest. We saw models earlier this morning, kind of shunt out this convection and try to, some GFS excluded. But we were seeing is models trying to center that new upper level low to form off the original. I can turn it down one. So what we've been seeing with models is we center this convection more closer to the original upper level low, and when we do that, what we do is either we're going to shunt this convection off, or we're going to wrap it in. And that's what we saw with those NAM runs last night, right? We saw was it this one right here? Yeah. Right, notice here it shunts off, right, this NAM run, right, shunts off the convection, and it really starts to pull off with the upper level low. And when we intensify that, if we increase, how do I put this? When we wrap in and we consolidate our new upper level low from here, this allows like New York City to get more involved, and it does, because when we do this, when we do right is instead of going full inverted trough and wrapping, and we rain, we're a little too warm here in the city. What we do is, as we wrap, we consolidate
that we consolidate this low pressure low. Now, this was not the run I wanted. Was it 060? Here we go. Was it this one or was it 12Z? There you go. Yeah, it was this run from this morning. What we do is we consolidate this low pressure. Notice how much tighter we consolidate this low pressure, and so we start to wrap in colder air, and we get to snow sooner in the city, and lower Hudson Valley and all those places. Now, I'm not sure. I don't think that's the most realistic scenario. I don't think we're gonna wrap in that much. I don't think we're gonna wrap in that much, but I do think we're gonna be somewhere in between with this system. We're gonna be somewhere in between where we get more of a. That's why I kind of liked the 18Z of this model in particular. It's not the model itself; it's just the run itself. In terms of right, because I'm not buying. Listen, it's not trying to. It's not trying to figure out which model is the best here. That's not what we're trying to do when we're forecasting this, right? When we're forecasting, we're trying to figure out um, which where do the models line up with current thoughts. So basically, where are models wrong? And it's a game of figuring out where models are wrong rather than trying to pinpoint which model is the best. And I think that's a common mistake we talk about a lot in past storms. But this one in particular, I think people are getting too caught up in trying to figure out where exactly is the best model right now. And to be answered, it's figuring out which model run specifically lines up most with the thoughts, and not just one model. Because we're seeing with this storm, models go back and forth a lot run to run, and for a reason we've talked about, right, is we have a lot of convection out ahead of this system and out to the east, so it's having trouble. It's latching on to certain pockets of convection at times, and then once it does try to wrap this into the picture, is we get a double barrel look, and that double barrel look is really volatile, and you can get a different kind of double barrel look every single run, or sometimes you don't get a double barrel look if it latches on to convection closer and it's able to consolidate sooner. So I think we're going to be somewhere in between, to be honest. Like a I think it's going to be in between, to be honest, of the 18Z NAM and 0Z NAM. Now it's not not the model specifically, just the run that's printed out, and I think it was somewhere between an in between of the 12Z Euro and the 12Z NAMs where I was earlier today, and now I'm hanging a little bit in between, something in between this latest NAM run, where you can see what we're leaning to when I just tweeted about it is we get a little bit of a sharper trough here. Notice we get a little bit of a sharper trough on these past few runs. We'll watch this northern feature kick in a little bit. Actually, this is not the best example of a sharper trough. It's originally. We were looking at it in the beginning. I'll take a look at the GFS back in a second, but all right, we kick in this piece a little bit sooner, and we get a little bit sharper of a trough. And we're also seeing, as an effect too, this convection pull closer, and that's allowing the low pressure to consolidate closer to this convection here. And NAM's still having a little bit of trouble pinpointing how early exactly it wants to take off with that convection, and then it gets kind of a little bit of an inverted trough scenario for a little bit longer than I think we will. Now, if we were to see something like this set up, it is possible. So I don't want to say it's not possible, but if we do see this kind of setup happen, it is possible where we can get a full-on inverted trough scenario, and boom, we thump here until the surface low really starts to take over. And however, how close that happens, then maybe. Now, I think this is to an extent we're going to see something like that, but not to the extent of what we're seeing with the NAM. Not to that extent. Now the 3K, the reason it does I think a little bit better is because it's a little bit higher resolution. So sometimes it's to its downfall, but here it works out with the higher resolutions because it's not going to is going to latch onto that strongest area a little bit better, and we miss out on 4 frames, which kind of important frames. Um, and then we get a little bit less of an inverted trough look, even though we still hold on to it. And the your thing you're seeing with the loops here on a lot of these model runs is right here's our original upper level low here, and here's our new upper level low forming. And so what happens is it's still a little bit of a double barrel look because they're not completely consolidated. This is going to wrap into our new upper level low and then consolidate. But during this process, until that happens, you're still going to get a bit of an inverted trough. And I think it takes just a little too long here on this run. And what happens is this just actually keeps running instead of waiting for this to catch up. I don't think the surface low is going to try to get that far out in front. And we'll hold on a little bit farther south, and that will allow this to catch up a little bit sooner. And so that big loop you're seeing in all these model runs, some are like into like Eastern Mass, some of these, and then others are like all the way out here, and then they wrap back in. I don't think we're going to see a loop that big. Now, is it possible? Yes, it is possible, but I don't think we're going to be going to be worrying about a loop that big. And you see it here on the NAM 12K2, similar, just a little bit higher resolution on the NAM 3K. And something important to note: some people are going to get caught really focusing in here on the surface. But typically, when you look at 700, it's been a little bit. It's not fully strength, probably not strengthening a significant amount still on Tuesday evening. But a lot of people are getting caught, even if this was verbatim. Is typically you look just north and west of the 700. So I would look here on the specific run, even though the banding on the precip type map doesn't look like it's getting out that far. It looks like the heaviest precip is getting right here. I would imagine it's gonna get out a little bit further inland. But again, that's just verbatim for this run, and I don't think it's worth getting too caught up. But it's just something to take note of when you're looking at a lot of the surface depictions on these runs, and also the 700 look completely changes if the 500 look is different too. So that's also something to consider. Now with this latest GFS, let's take a look. I kind of had an idea of what we were going to do with this run. And much less of a double barrel look here. Original upper level lows virtually unchanged, but we're wrapping in the convection much better here. Notice, right, there's our surface low is going to pop. There's going to be still a double barrel look, absolutely. But you still get, this weird double barrel, and then it wraps in. You get a massive loop, and that new upper level low converges and consolidates over Nantucket. But just some weird stuff. It's better than last run. And when I say better, more accurate. But look how much you're jumping. If we're jumping our surface low on that, look at this. I mean, this is 42 hours out from really like 36, and the storm is more like 12, not 12, but like 24 hours out, depending on where you live. And look how much we're jumping with this thing. I mean, you want to talk about a lack of consistency? The surface jumps of all these different model runs here from the GFS should tell you enough how much to trust this model. And listen, I don't have bias here. A lot of these model runs have been slamming me left and right with these weird double barrel looks. I get like on these 10-1 maps, I get like 2 feet on like a ton of these double barrel looks. So it's not right. It's not about bias, and I know a lot of you know that, but I just try to make that clear if any of you are a little skeptical of what I'm talking about, because the double barrel benefits you a little bit more. But the GFS, I'm telling you, I don't think it's going to get one surface depiction right until the storm is actually happening. To be honest, I really don't think it's I think it's going to continue and continue to struggle all the way up till the storm happens. Now, our higher resolution models, as we get pretty close, I think those are what we're going to have to rely on. HRR, I'm not sure about the HRR, but NAM, RGM, Euro, I think Euro is a high res model, by the way, even though it's not, it's 9 kilometers. It still is technically a high res model. I just think, you know, Canadian is going to start to lose traction. That's why the RGM is just high res Canadian. So, and the RGM is still holding on to kind of a double barrel look and does a weird loop here. Um, so it's still a little bit complicated. Listen, it's possible. It's very possible we see a double barrel look. It's just rare it ever happens to the extreme we're seeing on some of the model runs. It's very rare that we see it happen on some of these model runs, like we're seeing to the extent. Um, I think more likely scenario is we get an inverted. Our most likely scenario here is we get this inverted trough. We get this inverted trough to set up. We get this inverted trough, and honestly, this 0Z NAM run is not that far off. If it consolidates this convection, if it just consolidates more like we see at 700, this is why I think 700 has been a key for the storm. I'm not sure. But if you look at 700 compared to 500, you can see, look how much stronger we are at 700. It's obvious here. It's obvious to me that we want to consolidate, that it's going to consolidate this energy right here. This is where we're going to consolidate, and we're going to potentially stack our from 5 to 7 to surface. And then you look at 500, right? Matches up, but we still have a lot of weird stuff going on here and not wrapping this into the flow of this new surface flow that's about to pop. And I think this is where we would, or it's not going to go that far northeast, but it'll wrap in like this, kind of do a little bit of a loop, small loop, and then boom, kick out. And again, I even think this would be a little bit more boom, something like this, and then kicks out. I think that's more likely, and that's more of an in-between of what we're seeing on a lot of these model runs. Notice how it's trying to take off here, but it just keeps getting easily pulled north, and then it's going to get wrapped around this basically, and this doesn't really get pulled in. All right, it's going to probably shunt some of this, is my guess. It's still holding on to this convection, but I think it would pull this in more, and then we'd see this inverted trough stop a little bit sooner, and then this gets pulled into the flow sooner as well. That's the scenario I'm most leaning towards right now. I think that's what models are trying to tell us. I could be wrong, but I think that's what models are trying to tell us. And when that kind of scenario happens, you get a little bit less of an inverted trough that we're seeing on some of these double barrel looks, and then you get more consolidation of the new surface flow that pops, and you get more, you get heftier snowfalls, well into New England. And I think that, to me, when I see this setup, I think that's the most likely scenario, because when we do consolidate our from when we do stack at 5 to 700, as that process is happening, I think that is where we're going to really see our those snow bands really take off. In particular, looking at a deformed band to set up somewhere, into Eastern Mass, into Central Mass, and possibly decay out in the Berkshires. And then, in between, as this is happening too, as we start to shift our energy, literally, not figuratively, to the surface low, as that happens, as this wraps around, as this starts to wrap into the flow, what we'll see here as an extension, at 700 is what happens, is what's left of our inverted trough. We still kind of get those isobars to stack. We still get our energy to stack in between, and we're still going to be able to thump snow up up into here until this happens. Now I think models are, especially like this specific NAM run, is prolonging it a little bit longer than what I think, because I think it's taking a little too long to consolidate the energy around here, like we've been talking about, or vorticity. And when this happens sooner, this allows this to take off a little bit sooner, and we don't see that big loop around. And instead, it's just a more direct path, small stall loop, and then pulls out. And you will see my snow map tomorrow reflect that. I have a pretty confident idea of what I'm going to do with my snowfall map. How it executes, it's hard to say. And then on the back side of this, notice as the surface low starts to take off, then there's a chance for New York City, northern New Jersey to still get some snow on Tuesday evening. I will probably still be pretty well saturated, and as these, there'll be some chance for some bands to rotate through on Tuesday. Now, if they happen Tuesday during the day and it's not full on heavy snow, it may struggle to accumulate. It may struggle to accumulate more. If you have questions, just throw them in the chat. A lot of people have been dropping questions, and I promise I will work my way through all your guys' questions. $3K. You can see the difference between the 3K and the 12K. Does a little bit better job. Notice how everything's a little bit tighter, a little bit more consolidated. That's just the higher resolution, most likely being able to pick up on it a little bit better. 12K, right? 12K NAM is 12 kilometers, so it's a little bit lower resolution, and the NAM 3K is a little bit higher resolution. So it's going to, really hone in into convective activity. Sometimes it's a disadvantage to the model. If anybody that follows the NAM during hurricane season knows it's a disadvantage to the model, and sometimes it's an advantage. Again, it's not favoring any model. It's the model runs itself and what I see and how it lines up. And again, if we continue, we will continue to see better consolidation too if the NAM keeps, or if the NAM is any indication of maybe more models. Let's see if the GFS did it, actually. I'm curious. Did the GFS do this too? I mean, we wrapped in the convection further in, so I'm going to assume so. It's almost virtually unchanged, to be honest. Slightly sharper, barely, so a little bit, yeah. And we wrap in the convection is a little bit tighter. Height lines are a little bit more amplified off the East Coast, so it looks like the GFS, I mean, it's both American, and NAM and GFS will assimilate the same data. So typically any changes you see on the NAM, that typically the model may run different because it's a different model technically, but probably we'll see. Typically you see the GFS and the NAM follow pretty closely together in terms of changes. I really don't think any model has been that consistent. Euro is 230 now, or 145. The Euro comes out now 230 for like all the ensembles and stuff. Okay. Before I'll answer, I promise I'm going to answer all you guys' questions. So you got them, keep dropping them. I want to go through. Oh, I got to look at let me look at the Canadian, and I'll go over my snowfall thoughts. What I think I'm going to do snow map wise. You can already see my thoughts already on the snow map, or the snow threat map. Canadian. Yeah, I don't know what to make. I'm not sure how much left this model has. I guess it does similar stuff here. It's a little bit sharper, and it wraps in the convection a little bit farther southwest. But I'm not sure how much it was right for the wrong reasons yesterday. Um, not sure how well. It looks like it's not horrible. It's not doing horrible. It's honestly not doing horrible. But some of those mesoscale features and at the surface, it's going to struggle with significantly. I don't think the low pressure is going to come in on Long Island. What you're seeing is double barrel look, and that's the euro is intensifying. This part is our this upper level low right here is so far detached that euro is still intensifying this low, and it's really taking a long time. And then we wait for this big loop to happen before this meets this. And so that's why I think the euro had some merit at some point, but again, it's really more specific at this point. It's not about the model right now; it's about the run specifically. Um, that's what it's about right now in terms of, and then aligning that with, you know, with my thoughts. Ultimately, they're not all that unchanged from last night. They're really not. They're really not all that unchanged. It looked like there was an opportunity for them to change a little bit, um, but ultimately, I'm not all that unchanged from last night. To be honest, it's pretty similar thoughts. And then in regards for snowfall totals, I really think I should go yellow here. Uh, I think there's a good shot for 6+. I think there's a good shot for 6+. North and west of here. Again, this is just relative, so I'm not gonna try to get too in depth here. 12+. I think you can see, and then go over the valley, lower elevations. I have some concerns, and then I'm not going to draw all the way up the valley for this one, but I think 12+ is a good bet for. That looks messy. Roughly, around there, and then where exactly from this point, figure out where exactly deformation banding sets up. Now, not everywhere in here is going to get like 6+ and 12+. Let's be clear about that. Not everywhere in here is going to get 6+ and 12+. There will be some in between. People that are in subsidence as well, they will not get the best banding. Subsidence means you're in between banding. You're caught in in between. We have rising and sinking air, and so if you get caught, that air is rising, and you get caught in between the banding. You have banding on each side. In between, it's called subsidence, and you're caught in between the best dynamics, and then you just get left out of everything. And I think those be a chance. I look for this deform band to set up the longest for, I think, in here. This is where I'm looking at. It's a little broad, but I think we can consolidate a little bit longer. And then the best of the inverted trough, I think, is, I think right here. And then bands will flow off. So bands will flow off even wherever the deform, if it pivots there, or if it sets up here, or even if it's set up full on like Eastern Mass, in a more extreme scenario, which is possible, but and it looks more likely if you were just looking at the surface, but I don't think it's most likely. You're still going to get, if we were to set up a band here, you would still get, banding that's going to flow off here, and part of it would be still some leftover dynamics, leftover convection from where the inverted trough had set up. And with combined elevation, higher elevation, we're just going to see some 2 foot plus totals in here, and here in elevation is going to be a really, really important factor. But I think we're going to see a widespread, like 12. I think it's like a widespread, like 12 to 20. For obviously you can see where I drew in the area for elevation concerns, but I think it's a widespread 12 to 20. Um, we're looking at here now. Again, you have a lower elevation, and I like drew you when I draw my snow map tomorrow. There's going to be people that have lower elevation, higher elevation. You have to know your elevation here, because if I draw you to get like a foot and you like at like 100 feet elevation, then maybe you want to look more at like 10 to 12. But I'm not going to draw around your backyard. I don't know the elevation of your house. I can't tell you that. You can only tell that to yourself. I'm just going to draw like the general idea, so you have awareness. And if I draw you in here, and if I and you're not in like the like if I drew it like let's say I'm not probably not gonna use a 12 to 20, but if I did a 12 to 20 and you're not and you like have a high elevation here in Connecticut, like for example, you have like 1,000 feet elevation, then do some put two and two together, and you're probably going to get a little bit more than like a 6 to 12, and then you're probably more like a 12 to 20. You're going to get better ratios. The higher elevation you are, the better ratios you're going to get with this storm. Now, it's not going to be full on elevation dependent, but elevation is going to be a significant factor when it comes to ratios. That being said, I don't think it's when you're under the best lift and you're under the best dynamics, your ratios are not going to be like 6 to 1. Like they're just not going to be. When you're in the best band, when you're like, if you get under that CCV band, you get under that deform band, and you're in it, and you're in the best banding for a while, you're probably going to be 10 to 12 to 1. Honestly, you'll probably be 10 to 12 to 1 when you're in the best banding. Now, when you're out of it, that's a different story. You'll probably be right. Column will be a little bit warmer. You'll probably be like 34 to 36 degrees. And I'm talking more specifically away from the coast, probably like 34 to 36, and moderate snow, and you won't be accumulating as much, especially during the daytime. Now, if you during the daytime and you're puking snow, it's not going to make a difference. A little bit, sure, but for the most part, it's not going to really make a difference. It's not going to make all that big of a difference. If you're under the heaviest, you're in the real thick of the banding, which there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be in it. It's not going to make all that much of a difference compared to what you're hearing. Like, sure, it's probably going to be still heavier wet snow, because a lot of, you'll probably still see a good amount of snow that's out, that's not in just a bit, right? You're not going to be in heavy snow for 20 straight hours. That's just not how this works. Actually, some people could become pretty, if you have like, some people could get some orographic lift, so like that's possible. But again, that's like a whole nother forecast. Do I? All right, let's go some questions. Do I think that RG and Canadian is too warm at the surface, or is it just doing a better job at the NAMs? We talk about this all the time. The Canadian RGM the RGM does a little bit better than the Canadian. Again, it's the same model, just a higher resolution. Um, so you'll get a little bit different stuff, but it's just a high res Canadian. The RGM is. So it's going to struggle at the surface. So it's important not to get too caught up at what you see at the surface when it comes to the model and for the Canadian. And the NAM is going to do a better job at resolving stuff at the surface. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to do a great job at what it resolves. It's going to do a better job, the Canadian, to depict the environment, but it doesn't mean what we're seeing from 500 to the surface is exactly what it should be showing, if that makes sense. Like it may not line up. What we're seeing at the surface may not line up with what we're seeing, above the surface when forecasting. All right, let's scroll all the way up here through these Twitter. Thoughts on new GFA? We looked at that. Northern New Jersey, tough spot. Could be 2 to 4, around a foot. Don't know to trust. Any thoughts? Um, Again, it's relative to where you live in northern New Jersey. Elevation will be key to if you're low elevation, northern New Jersey. I think you're gonna struggle. You're gonna struggle a little bit with this one, but if you're high elevation, not only will you have a better chance to mix the snow earlier. Again, it's going to be rain or snow. It's not going to be in between. Um, you'll have an opportunity to flip the snow a little bit sooner, and also you can get a little bit better ratios. So people that have elevation and like northeastern New Jersey could make out pretty well with this one. I forget. I didn't study. I don't know the Jersey County specifically, but like south of Sullivan and just south of Rockland, um, people that have good elevation could make out pretty well. They could get like 8 to 12 um, inches of snow or more, depending on again the longer. If you live not the city itself, but if you live in here, you want this inverted trough feature to last around for a little bit while. Now, it doesn't mean you still can't get a good amount of snow. You either want that, or you really want the surface load to consolidate much closer to the original upper level low. That will be back moving through PA and will be moving east. And you want that. And if you live in New York City, regardless of what happens, you want this upper level low to travel a little bit more south because you want to be north of the upper level low. And if you're north of the upper level low, that means you're going to be in a better spot to get better dynamics and more snowfall. Doesn't mean a lot more snowfall, but more potentially. Um, yeah, southern Vermont should be in a good spot. They're going to get a lot of orographic lift too. And also, I expect, like we talked about, how Banning's going to get flow. Like these are going to go way into here, especially the inverted trough. Like we're going to see these Banning get way out away from the system. It's going to get way out ahead. So like really everybody is gonna get into the snow. Everybody's gonna get into the snow, and especially out in the further interior, out here in northern New England, in central western New York. They're gonna have probably pretty decent ratios, probably more 10-to-1 ratios, and in higher with places that have elevation. What happened if you're? I mean, we kind of discussed that. Um, about the Euro, general public not ready for this. This is a monster. I mean, monster I don't like to use like a ton of hype. I don't want to like hype something more up than it is. I just want to. I like to call it as now. It's possible, Major could justify this storm potentially, but I do think uh, that it's just a beginning. It's going to be a classic blockbuster. I think for a lot of people, and that it's going to drop a widespread area of 10 to 20 inches of snow. Like I think it's widespread, like 10 to 20 inches of snow for basically everybody in here. I think it's a widespread 10 to 20. In the immediate coastline, I still have some concerns here. Um, I still have some concerns with the immediate coastline, and that's really all up and down the immediate coastline. I still have some concerns. Providence, Rhode Island. Uh, Tough call. Tough call. I think even if you do, unlike places a little bit further interior, I think you still will struggle with snowfall ratios a little bit. I don't think you'll ever be, even in the best banding you'll get. I don't even know if you'll be above 10-to-1 or even at 10-to-1 in the best banding. So I do have some concerns there, but I think um, like a 6 to 12, 8 to 16 kind of range for Providence. I think 8 to 14. I think somewhere in that range. I would lean for Providence right now. Um, But if you do get caught in subsidence, you could get really screwed, and it could be more like a 4 to 3 to 6, 4 to 8 in Providence if you do get caught in between the best banding. For NY Northern Central Jersey, I think I kind of covered Northern Central Jersey. Again, the further further north and east you go, northeast you go, the better, the better. Um, but if you have good elevation in Jersey, then I wouldn't be too worried about getting a good 6+ inches of snow. Could the storm be catastrophic? Again, I don't think catastrophic is the right word. There could be a ton of power outages. There could be a ton of power outages, and that's a concern. But potentially though, again, under those good banding, we could see a little bit higher ratios than what models are suggesting. Because you got to remember, models when they do these soundings on models, you got to remember. Well, we'll take HRR sounding for example. When they take these soundings, and actually I screenshotted one. I was looking pretty sexy earlier. I'm not gonna lie, I was looking pretty good. When you take these soundings on models, let's see where we want to go. We'll take one. Boom, right here. That looks special. Yeah, there you go. So when we take these soundings here, something to consider is, right, when these models compute their snowfall ratios, the Kuchera 10 to 1, 10 to 1 is an exact liquid equivalent. So it doesn't even account for any temperature or any lift. It doesn't account for any lift in the atmosphere or any temperatures. Kuchera at least counts for temperature, but a lot of times it doesn't work to be super accurate, because it's a weird model calculation, and also doesn't count for the dendritic growth zone as well. Something to consider is you have to look at how much lift you have, how much omega, and then you look at to see how close you are. Where is your dendritic growth zone? Right here, right, consistently. Boom, our dendritic growth zone is around 550. That's a pretty low. And on this sounding here, this is in central Mass. And then we're -10 at 650. So 550 to 650 is our dendritic growth zone. So from here to here, right, this is a vertical column of the atmosphere, right? So this is an air partial that traveled down from the top of the atmosphere. It's going down to the surface. And this is what, it's taking like a vertical, imagine it's taking a snapshot of this air parcel moving down the atmosphere, right? This is the top of the atmosphere. Here's the surface, right? And so here's our dendritic growth zone. And this is where our snowflakes are made. So our snowflakes are made in our dendritic growth zone. And so they line it out for you, but I like, draw it myself, just to verify. And then when you look at these soundings, you want to be able to identify, right, our omega. Our omega is how much lift, how strong are the dynamics, how much lift are we working with. And, the more omega you have, the heavier the snowfall you're likely to have. And so a lot of times you want to look, what you want to look for to see is how cold you are all the way down from your dendritic growth zone to the surface. And so, right, we're a little bit warm here, a little bit warmer than I prefer again. But these models, you got to remember, also, this sounding is taken based on the scenario depicted. So this may not be the exact scenario depicted, and that changes what the soundings are. So you got to take these with a grain of salt sometimes when you're a little far out, like 42 hours out for the or like 40 hours out for the HRR might be a little too much to ask for to get. But it's still, you can get a good idea of what you're working with for the system. And so even though we're 34 degrees at the surface under really heavy, intense precipitation, this could be even a little bit cooler. And right, the cooler you are throughout your column, the fluffier of a snow you're going to get. The fluffier of a snow you get, the easier it's going to accumulate. Have to remember that, right? That heavier, wetter snow comes when you're really flirting with this line all the way down to the surface. So here it's not bad. This is probably, close to a 10 to, it's probably close to 10 to 1 ratios right here, if we're when we're snowing heavy Now let's go outside. Let's go to the coastline a little bit. Probably still thumping pretty good, but I want to go like or something. Let's pull. So here's not inside the best banding right now. Not inside the best banding, and look. Notice how we're not as cold compared to our last sounding. We were much colder here, and our line was closer to here, and then we dropped down a little bit more at the surface. Compared to this sounding here, notice how much warmer we are. Notice how much warmer we're flirt with this line a lot more, and we're also lacking lift in our dendritic growth zone. So this, when I see this sounding, this to me looks like just white rain. You're snowing 35 degrees. When is this? Is this during the day? Yeah, this is Saturday morning at this point. Sorry, not Saturday morning. Tuesday morning at this point, and you're probably not thumping. You're probably not thumping. You're just accumulating very lightly at this point. So you got to be able to look at soundings to be able to identify what kind of ratios you're working with. So I like to use soundings to put together a good formula for ratios, and then I can look at QPF as well. What time does precipitation start? What's a good elevation? Typically, if you're, once you start to get 500-600 feet, that's when you can notice a little bit of a difference. But typically, 8 to 1,000 feet. If you're 8 to 1,000 feet, that's a good elevation to have, for if you're not on like a mountain. And then once you start to get, 12, 1,500 feet and higher, that's when you really start to see some significant, massive differences like that. Like you being at 1,500 feet elevation and like 300 feet elevation, that 1,200 foot difference in elevation could be the difference in like 6 to 12 inches of snow potentially, or maybe more if we're talking about the difference between the rain snow line. So that's why anybody that lives in Eastern Mass, Blue Hill, they have elevation, the observatory, so they tend to get a little bit more snow a lot of times than places around them do. What time does precipitation wrap up? Around 4:95 in Massachusetts. At the latest, and there'll be some orographic stuff in the mountains probably. In the higher elevations, we'll still have some orographic stuff. And I'm sure there'll be some sort of band in Central and Eastern Mass that will stick around. But Wednesday morning is when this wraps up. For around, depending on where you live on 495, the further east you go, the more. But this will wrap up 495 around, somewhere around, 2 to 10 a.m. probably, depending on where you live. And the peak time frame for snow will be Tuesday morning to Tuesday night. That will be the peak time frame for heaviest snow. Do you think models are struggling on the surface end of showing what is snow or rain, especially in heavy banding and close to the rain snow line? Do I think models are struggling? Yes, yes, there are some models, in particular lower resolution models. I think they are struggling. We talked about this a little bit so far already in the stream, and a lot of other streams as well. But models do just sometimes, also if the scenario that we talk about isn't exactly how I think it's going to pan out, the surface is immediately going to be off. And then sometimes what that scenario it's depicting may not necessarily be what exactly it's trying to show in the upper levels. What's trying to show above the surface may not match what it's showing at the surface in these model runs, and that's another thing you have to consider. When looking at all these model runs here. And so that's why you just can't look at 10-1, or it doesn't matter the snowfall map. You can't look at snowfall maps and just, You can't just latch on to what they show. What model coming out are you looking forward to seeing? I'm looking forward to seeing all the model runs. I know that wasn't the answer you're looking for, but I'm looking forward to seeing all the model runs. I'm curious. I'm very curious to see, um, you know, some small little details in the upper levels. At 500, I'm curious to see what models do. There's been some small little changes. Um, to the trough, over the past few runs. So I'm curious to see what models do with that. But I'll be very curious to see. I think I'm most intrigued by the Euro run. Those Euro runs. I want to see if it can resolve some of those convective feedback problems. And if it does, it may be our best. It may be our best bet in terms of a lot of the models we have. It may be something. I think it was something I felt like we were able to trust a little bit more until today. We got a lot of those double barrel looks. I think we had a double barrel look for 1 or 2 runs yesterday, maybe, and now we've had a double barrel look for 2 consecutive runs today as well. So, or 3 consecutive runs: 06Z, 12Z, and 18Z. So, little. Um, very intrigued to see what we get from our 0 run tonight, which I'll be up for. Don't worry. And this model is an even higher res of the Canadian as well. And ironically enough, it's struggling with the surface map. So, what that's worth. And it's also full on. This is full on double barrel too, unless it shunts this, which it most likely isn't going to do. Uh, NAM's still good for New York City. I mean, I think New York City here. Let me go here. And it's not a coincidence, that I put this line here, right near New York City, because I think just north of New York City, where you're a little bit farther away from the ocean, it's going to be more beneficial to not only snowfall ratios, but also just to snow in general. And so I could see, again, I think your ceiling with this system is like 6 to 12 in New York City. I think that's your max ceiling for me, in my opinion. I don't think you get more than 6 to 12. Um, and realistically, forecast it was like 1 to 3 in New York City. And even then, it might be closer. Like it might be more like a half inch to like an inch and a half in New York City, just because when you really start thinking about it, like how long are you going to be in that heavy snowfall? And if you're not in that heavy snowfall and you're snowing during the day, how much of that is really going to accumulate in New York City? Like you have to think about it. Like it's more than just what the model runs show. You have to think about how that snow is actually going to accumulate on the surfaces in New York City. That's something you got to remember when forecasting for not just cities in general, but in particular New York City. That's surrounded by a lot of water, and it's further south, than Boston or Portland or Providence. So I think New York City, like a regional like 1 to 4. I think given what we're seeing, I think that's a fair range for New York City. Um, in a reasonable higher end scenario, is 4 to 8 is a reasonable high end scenario for New York City. I think your floor is like a coating to 2 inches. My forecast would be 1 to 4. Um, a reasonable higher end scenario, 4 to 8, and then that max ceiling I think is like a 6 to 12 for New York City. I think that's your max, and like the suburbs too of New York City as well. Now again, we go just north of the city. We start, we hop into like Rockland County, right, or Westchester, right. We started getting into those counties just north of New York City. Now we can start talking about, I think, a little bit higher potential, especially, right, we're not at sea level. We're a little bit higher than sea level, a little bit better elevation. We're also going to be probably snowing a little bit earlier than we are in New York City. I think now their ceiling is a little bit higher. I think their max ceiling is like a 12 to 18 inch ceiling for a lot of those people. All right, I think highest area of uncertainty right now is boom. Is this whole area right now. I think we're pretty clear on this area, but the reason I drew this area, and we're gonna even it out. I think it's the highest area of uncertainty right now, and a lot of it for places on the southern edge of this line, it relies a little bit more on rain, snow, how long you stay rain or snow, and then places on the more northerly side of where I drew, it relies a little bit more on being in the best banding, because some of these places aren't going to have real good elevation, and so you're going to have to rely on being consistently in good banding for a while. Yeah, you got questions? Boom, just drop them, and we'll keep going through questions here. We can go through it timing wise. Let's go through it timing wise. Well, if you have any more questions, drop them in. Why is this so far out? Here we go. The NAM 3K still got a little bit of a double barrel look, but it's not super far off where I lean. So tomorrow night we start tomorrow in general, we're going to rain a lot throughout the day. And then tomorrow night, this is where I want to zoom out a little bit. All right, so tomorrow night, what we're looking for throughout the day tomorrow is to see, how are we going to center that convection? How early is that surface low? How early is that surface low really going to take off, and where does it take off? And where that does happen will be key, and then how convection consolidates around that surface low will be very key to see. Because if it doesn't, then we may be going inverted trough double barrel look. We very well may do that, and we get something like this. We get the big loop. I think like the NAM 3K is like I think that's to the extreme of what we see in terms of a double barrel look. I don't think we see any more of a double barrel look than what we see with the NAM 3K. And again, it's not the NAM 3K, the model, it's just the model run itself. So we start to see, will snow throughout the day probably for, right, you can see that upper level low moving through over the Midwest, and then that, right, we start to come closer to our surface low, and then in between there, that's when we get that inverted trough to set up, and so we'll rain from New York City, Jersey, a lot of eastern PA too, and then that will start to flip to snow tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, that'll flip to snow for a lot of people, and then we'll see how long we hang on to that. I think right about now is where we would see that flip happen, and we start to consolidate closer to the surface low. So you get this inverted trough, and then what's ever left to move through. But I think we would stop intensifying as much as we see here on this run, and that energy would start to consolidate a little bit further east. And so that's why I also think with a little bit more of an inverted trough, I think there'll be an opportunity for this to the snowfall to extend out a little bit further east tomorrow night as well. A little bit further east. I think there will be an opportunity for the snowfall to extend out in this inverted trough. And then we start to consolidate, and I think you can still see it trying to hold on to the low here, but I think at this point we're consolidating a low pressure right around here, and we don't get the big loop. That loop doesn't happen if we're just consolidating that one area of low pressure sooner. And yeah, I'll answer your question in a second, I promise. And then from there, we start to really take off with our deformation band across New England. And then whoever is able to make out a little bit on the inverted trough, and then make out on some of the best dynamics from the deformation band that's going to set up, that's who's going to get the most snow, along with who has elevation to get better ratios. That will play a role absolutely too, which will be interesting to see for sure. Manchester, New Hampshire. I think you could get into. I'll be curious if you will be far enough south. I think you will be. I think you should be far enough south. Um, I think something like around that. I think that 10 to 20 inch range is a decent bet right now for Manchester. Wouldn't shock me if you're a little bit lower, a little bit higher. But I think roughly somewhere around that range, I think is a good bet for Manchester. Because I don't think you'll have a problem too much with temperatures. I think you'll be, and timing wise too, you'll work into it Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday night is when you peak with this event, and I think that will help too. But at the end of the day, probably your highest snowfall totals are just going to be, in these two areas here, because they're going to make out overnight, Monday night, tomorrow night into early Tuesday morning. They're going to pick up on a lot of that snow from our inverted trough, and then so they're not going to have to worry about any sun angle problems. Which sun angle plays a factor. We talk about this all the time, right? I don't think we need to go over this again. Sun angle plays a factor to an extent, but it's not as major when you're as some people make it out to be when you're snowing pretty heavy. But again, we prefer to snow at night at March. It's just, you'll be able to accumulate a little bit faster, especially on harder surfaces, if you want the snow. Honestly, I don't mind the sun angle because the roads stay drier, and I measure on a snowboard, so the snowboard usually still accumulates pretty nicely, and the roads aren't as messy, which I don't mind. But yeah, so I think like Catskills, like we could see some like 20 to 30, maybe even some 40-inch totals in the Catskills, and maybe in Berkshires too potentially, and then we'll look for like a 16 to 24 jackpot maybe in the somewhere in Worcester County, maybe somewhere like the 14, maybe like a 14 to 24. I don't know where exactly I'm going to go yet. With that, or like a 15 to 25. I don't know, somewhere in that range. I think is where I'm leaning right now in terms of snowfall totals. But for the most part, it's a widespread 6 to 12 inches for many, and then where people that get into the best banding, that's where you start talking about like 10 to 20 inches of snow and so on. We can toss the snow blowers in the back of the shed for the last time after the storm you're talking about. I think there's a chance down the road still. I think I would look, the MJO is moving into a pretty favorable phase, so I think maybe not the storm at the end of the week, but I think next week, I guess now we can say it's Monday technically, so next week I think there could be at the end of next week, maybe somewhere in that 20 to 25th time frame, we could watch out for something there. And that's just preliminary, like saying there could maybe be a storm, not like there's going to be a storm and we'll see what the details. We're not even close to that. I'm just taking based on climatology and the pattern at hand and the MJO, factoring a few different things, that there could be a shot for one more snowstorm, or maybe if you're further interior New England, Northeast, probably there'll be a chance for multiple more snowstorms. So Manchester, you'll probably still have some opportunity to get some more snow, if I had to guess, after this one. else? What other few model runs do we got loading out that I can take a look at? You can never get enough model runs. Actually, that's a lie. You can, but to an extent, if you know how to process the information, you don't have to worry about overloading your brain too much. Ensembles are kind of becoming less and less helpful and have really never been all that helpful in my opinion, but we'll take a look. That looks improved. Yeah, much better. Much better on the Jeffs. We can see we have a little bit, still double barrel. You can see how we're stretched here. And still we still have a wide, like stretched area of low pressure. Some of these, and like these guys are not the actual, these are like inverted trough surface loads right here. Same with like these guys in here. And then some of these in between that are pretty strong, like take off at the surface low a little bit better, and not a lot of these do, but this is an improvement. This is what we like to see, less double barrel, because I don't think the double barrel was ever realistic. So it looks like it's less. It looks like it's more consolidated on the previous run, but really it's just a lot more double barrel lows. Like there was just a lot more double barrel lows, and it was pretty consistent with a lot of double barrels, and so they were just further east, even though it looked more consolidated. It wasn't, because we go to the next round, we can see we get more lows to come, more tucked in, and I think that's ultimately. I think that's the most realistic scenario. We talked about this a lot. Did the last stream last night too. We're doing it. We did it a lot on tonight's stream as well, where I think we get something, we get a low track, that comes in. Maybe not that. Comes in, kind of stalls, and then loops out. And I think we'll look for a low track somewhere in here. I don't think we're going to get this massive double barrel that's way out here and then decides to loop in around. Double barrel is possible, and it'll be double barrel probably to an extent, but not as crazy as what we're seeing with a lot of these GFS runs. But yeah, I think this map represents my thoughts pretty well right now. I think a one wild card could be where we get if something as specific to the NAM were to verify, and we get double barrel, then maybe there's a little bit of a screw zone. And the best banding gets reserved for far eastern Mass. I guess is a possible scenario. It's not the most likely scenario in my opinion, even though it's what's being depicted. But if we continue to see, I live in Mass. I live by Worcester. So I'm in a pretty good spot for this storm, but we'll see. I still have trust issues, Confident that we can get a lot of snow over here, but also I've had a lot of storms that haven't. So you gotta learn to take the blows, and sometimes those punches hurt. Sometimes they hurt, and man, sometimes they hurt. Yeah, I'm sure all of you have had your busts before with snowstorms, but I'm more concerned just about getting this right. I've been off on a few of these snow maps lately, so I'm going to try to nail down some of these snow maps. This snow map in particular, completely different setup from anything we've seen so far this entire winter. So it's going to be hard to compare to, especially without no southeast ridge to worry about as well. Much different setup than what we've seen at all this entire winter. But I'm excited. I think this is going to be, I think it's probably going to be my biggest snowstorm of the year, and it's also going to be mostly everybody's. I mean, you may have just came in, so I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, but we talk about Sun Angle a lot on these streams and just in general. you may not have to worry about it as much if you're snowing like Tuesday evening and Tuesday night. That becomes maybe less of a problem. The thing is though, I don't think if you're snowing heavy, it becomes less of a problem. And also, if you're a little bit colder as well, that will help too. You're a little bit colder, you're a little bit higher elevation, and you're not quite at like you're well above sea level. That will help too. But if you're under heavy rates, listen. If you're under the best dynamics, I mean, look at these dynamics. Like if you're in this, take a look at AT&T. Like if you're in that, or you get like if you're in this, well, this is where that band sets up right here on this model run. That's that pivot point of this band. If you're in here, like on this specific run, not in general, I mean, you're going to thump. You're going to thump. Sun angle is not going to take away from that. You will absolutely thump. 1 to 3 inches per hour, no problem. I think we're going to be looking at snowfall rates potentially 1 to 3, 2 to 4 inches per hour for this one. And if you're in that banding for multiple hours, I mean, that's how you stack it up. Right? Think about it. If you're in 3 inch per hour rates for like 4 hours in a storm, that's a foot of snow. Boom. That's a foot of snow right there. That's a foot of snow. So I think that's where it comes down to at the end of the day, is being in the banding, in the best banding for as long as possible, and sun angle becomes much less of a problem. Even though, listen, I prefer not to have the sun angle issues, which technically there will be some. But yeah, I don't think sun angle is the biggest concern as long as you're in the best dynamics. Now, if you're outside, you're closer to the coast. You're not in the best dynamics. You're not in the heaviest snow. Sun angle absolutely becomes an issue then. Absolutely becomes an issue. You are not going to see very accumulative snow, and then now you're talking about you may be moderately snowing, but you're in light accumulation. Yeah, there's I don't know any other way to cut it. But there's going to be probably a few maximas on this storm, and they're going to be a lot of snow, man. A lot of snow. Most snow of the year for a lot of people in this system, depending on where you live. Like this should be the biggest snowstorm of the year for anybody. Like anybody northwest, like anybody in here, like this should be the biggest snowstorm of the year. Doesn't mean it can't be for places southeast of here. I know there's some low expectations, but this should pretty easily be the biggest snowstorm of the year for a lot of people. If we were normal daylight savings, we'd have 0 out right now, but we don't. It's all right. So, all right. I'll be on the Twitterverse. I appreciate everyone that came in. We'll stream again tomorrow, no doubt about it. We got one more question. Can heavy snowfall rates overcome the high sun angle? Yes, they can. Absolutely. Northwest Connecticut at 1,000 feet, still having top 5 inches. Yeah. Well, hey, listen, man. You'll probably get above that this storm. I can almost guarantee it. You'll get at least 5 inches of snow this storm. Yeah, I think you'll do well. All right. So I'll be on the Twitterverse though. Thanks for everybody that has came in, and we'll stream again tomorrow night. And I'll be on the Twitterverse. You got questions? At me, DM me, do what you got to do. Yeah. Until then.